They left her hanging between two trees until the cowboy rode in and said, "Touch her again and die." Colorado Territory, 18 after 19. The wind shrieked like a dying thing, hurling dust across the flat, sun-blistered land. Between two lifeless cypress trees, their bark stripped bare by years of drought, a woman hung. Hattie Bellamy, widow of the late Judge Charles Bellamy, swayed from ropes tied tight around each wrist. Her arms were stretched wide, bound to the trees so that her feet dangled inches from the cracked earth. Her dress hung in tatters. Sunburn streaked her skin raw, and blood had dried where the rope bit her wrists. Her face, once the soft porcelain of court receptions, was bruised and swollen. Her hair, a tangle of golden brown, blew across her cheek like a flag in surrender. Dozens stood watching. Men with miners' hands and gun belts, women in patched shawls, dirt-covered children peeking between their legs. They had not come for justice. They had come for a spectacle. "She thought a woman could play with power," someone muttered. "She stole court files," another spat. "No," said a third, "she found something she shouldn't have. This is a lesson for wives who forget their place." The man standing nearest to her, the one holding the coiled end of the rope, wore a star pinned to his chest. Elijah Blake, the deputy marshal. Tall, sun-creased, eyes like flint. Once he had dined at her table. Once he had called her husband brother. Now he stood with his boot on the lever of a crude pulley rig, the mechanism straining with tension. He turned to the crowd. "Let it be known, Hattie Bellamy is not above the law. She stole evidence, ran like a guilty dog, and refused to speak the name she uncovered." "I never ran," Hattie rasped, barely above the wind. "I followed the truth. I know what happened to Charles." Elijah's jaw tightened. "You will not slander the dead," he said. Then he gave the signal. A man on horseback pulled the rope taut. Hattie gasped as her shoulders twisted. Her back arched involuntarily. The cords burned through her skin. The wind picked up, shrieking between the trees. Then a crack. Not thunder. Gunfire. One of the pulley ropes snapped, torn clean through by a bullet. The force dropped her like a stone. She collapsed in the sand, limp, unconscious. Dust swirled. A horse stepped forward from the ridgeline, descending into view like a shadow cut from stone. Its rider sat still, calm, as the chaos froze. He wore a weathered duster, his hat pulled low. A Winchester rifle rested in a leather sling on his saddle. His boots were stained with travel. His stare was cold steel. He dismounted without haste, boots crunching the gravel. The dust parted as if afraid of him. "Touch her again," he said, voice low and deliberate, "and die." The crowd murmured, a ripple of unease shifting from man to man. Elijah narrowed his eyes. "This is not your business, stranger." The cowboy's eyes didn't flinch. He moved toward Hattie's body, stooping to lift her into his arms. "No law gives you right to interfere," Elijah growled. The man met his gaze for the first time. Law died the moment you used rope on a woman too weak to lift her own arms. Someone started to raise a rifle, then lowered it under the weight of silence. No one moved. No one dared. The cowboy adjusted the woman in his arms, turned, and walked to his horse. He swung her up onto the saddle, climbed up behind her, and nudged the reins. He never looked back. The last thing they saw was the edge of his coat disappearing into the red wind. The fire popped gently in the stone hearth. Outside, wind moaned through the rocks of the Colorado foothills, but inside the small mountain cabin the air was still and warm with steam. Sawyer Grady crouched by the stove, ladling broth into a tin bowl. His coat hung drying by the fire, and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing scarred forearms. A kettle hissed quietly beside the soup pot. He didn't look at the woman on the cot, only dipped a cloth into the basin beside him and wrung it out with quiet precision. He turned and laid the damp cloth across her forehead. Hattie Bellamy stirred, her breath hitched, eyes blinking against the low firelight. She tried to sit up, but her arms trembled under her own weight. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, cracked. "Who are you?" Sawyer placed the bowl on the table beside her, sat on the floor with his back against the wall. He looked at the flames for a long time. "I watched my sister hang," he said finally, not answering her question directly. "A girl with soft hands. Said she stole bread. Town didn't need proof, just someone to blame." Hattie stared, chest heaving, unsure if she was awake or still inside the nightmare. "You didn't touch me," she said slowly, realizing it aloud. "No need to," he said. "You were bleeding. I bandaged. That's all." She looked down. Her arms had been wrapped in clean cloth. A small blanket covered her legs. He stood, poured water into a tin mug, and set it on the table beside the bowl. "Drink. You've got a fever." She reached out, hands still trembling, and took the cup. The first sip burned, but it grounded her. "You took me," she said, "from them." He nodded once, then, after a pause, added, "You were half dead." "Why?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to stir the soup again, as if that question wasn't part of the deal. The silence settled between them like snow on a windowsill. She watched him, brow furrowed, trying to piece together the man who had appeared from nowhere and saved her without a reason. She set down the cup and spoke, voice still scratchy. "They think I stole something." Sawyer gave no sign of listening, but he didn't leave either. "My husband, Charles Bellamy, he was a circuit judge. We moved out here 2 years ago. He tried to stay clean. That's why they hated him." Still no reply. 3 weeks before he died, he stopped sleeping. I found him pacing. He told me he had a book, a record. Names of men on the take, from whiskey to land fraud. Said if something happened to him, I'd know what to do. Now Sawyer looked up. They said he fell from a horse. But he never rode without a bridle, and he never rode drunk. She swallowed hard. I searched his desk the next day. The book was gone. She wrapped her arms around herself. I asked questions. The wrong people noticed. And then someone claimed I stole classified files. Sheriff wrote a warrant before I could speak. I ran. Sawyer shifted slightly, but remained silent. "I was going to take the stagecoach to Denver," she said. "I had a contact there, a journalist, but they caught me first." He picked up the soup and handed it to her. "Eat." Hattie took the bowl, hesitated. "You still haven't told me who you are." He looked at her, eyes gray and unreadable. "Sawyer Grady, freight runner, used to scout for the Union Army." She blinked. "And now you rescue strangers tied to trees?" Sawyer took the empty teacup and refilled it without meeting her gaze. "Not strangers, just the ones no one else will." Then, more quietly, "I owed my sister that much." Hattie looked down at her soup, hands cradling the bowl. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask for it. The fire had burned low. Outside the cabin, wind sighed through pine needles, brushing the rocky outcrop like whispers from the past. Hattie sat by the table, her eyes distant. Sawyer sat across from her, rolling a cigarette, his face unreadable in the amber light. A heavy silence hung between them, thick with words neither had spoken. Until now. "I never wanted any of this," she said quietly. He didn't look up. She drew in a breath. "Charles, my husband, he was a good man. Too good for that town." Sawyer lit the cigarette and let the smoke curl between his fingers. "In the beginning," she continued, "people respected him. A federal judge, all proper and by the book. He thought he could make a difference." Sawyer leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He started hearing things," Hattie said. "Stories about rail contracts, stolen land deeds, whiskey taxes disappearing, names he recognized, men he shook hands with at town meetings." Her fingers traced the edge of the tin cup in front of her. "One night I woke to find him in his study, holding a pistol. He said, 'If I don't write it down, I'll be next.'" She looked up, eyes shimmering. "He kept a ledger, names, dates, amounts, crimes, a black book that could tear the town in half. He showed it to me once. Said, If anything happens to me, you burn it or run." Sawyer's brow twitched, but he said nothing. "I didn't run," she said bitterly. "Not fast enough." She stood and walked to her satchel in the corner, pulling something wrapped in oilcloth from beneath a folded shawl. She placed it on the table. Slowly, carefully, she unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small black ledger, leather-worn, edges scuffed, but intact. "I found it the day after his funeral, hidden behind a false panel in his desk." She opened it and flipped through the pages. Judge Ryland, Sheriff Amos, Mayor Lively, even Elijah Blake. Her voice broke. Charles wrote it all down. Bribes, threats, even names of victims who were made to disappear. She closed the book and hugged it to her chest. "I was going to take it to Denver, to the Gazette, but someone tipped them off. They said I stole federal files. They put my name on wanted posters, just like a horse thief." Sawyer rested his forearm on the table, studying her. "I ran from one county to another. I hid in barns, slept in dried creek beds. Every time I tried to send a letter or board a train, someone would be there, watching." She paused, then looked up. "I thought I could hide long enough to find help. I never expected them to drag me into the desert and hang me like a warning." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, trembling. "I am not the brave one, Mr. Grady. I was scared every day." Sawyer opened his tobacco pouch again, pouring leaves into paper with practiced hands. "You still have the book," he said, calm as stone. "That's braver than most." Hattie sat back down, fingers gripping the edge of the ledger. "I should burn it," she whispered. "I should throw it in the fire and forget it ever existed." "But you won't?" She looked at him. "You didn't run when they tied you up. You didn't scream." He struck a match. "That tells me you still think there's something worth fighting for." The match flared, lit his cigarette, and was snuffed. He leaned forward, resting both elbows on the table. The smoke curled around his jaw. "Kinda rare," he said. "Someone wants the truth more than they want to live." She studied him, unsure what to make of his quiet certainty. Finally, she asked, "Then why did you save me?" Sawyer didn't hesitate. "Because I once stood by and watched them hang my sister," he said, voice like gravel and regret. She didn't cry either. He crushed the cigarette in the tin tray. "I've been looking for someone who'd fight back since then. Someone I could believe in." She blinked, unsure how to respond. He stood, nodding toward the ledger. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll need a plan." She clutched the book tighter. Outside, the wind howled like judgment in the dark. But inside, between two battered souls and the truth bound in black leather, something steady had begun to burn. By dawn, the mountains wore a crown of fog. The smell of pine and frost hung heavy in the air. Sawyer knelt in the dirt near the edge of the cabin. His gloved fingers brushed across the faint print of a horseshoe. He stood slowly, scanning the tree line. "They're close," he muttered. Hattie appeared in the doorway, still buttoning her coat. "What is it?" "Someone's trailing us. Rider. Alone, maybe 2 days behind. Not from around here. The hoof's too narrow, eastern breed." She stepped forward, a trace of alarm in her eyes. "They found us?" Sawyer didn't answer directly. He turned back toward the cabin and began unpacking a coiled line of wire and some sharpened stakes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Setting a snare," he said. "We may not have long." That afternoon, he handed her a revolver. Hattie blinked. I've never used one." "You are going to learn," he said. "Now." He showed her how to grip it, how to check the cylinder, how to cock and aim. "Keep your elbows loose. Let the kick work through your arms. Don't fight it." She lined up the sight and fired. The bullet went wide. Again. By sunset, she was hitting a knot in a pine trunk from 30 feet. That night, they didn't sleep much. Hattie paced while Sawyer sat by the fire, sharpening a blade. Every snap of twigs outside made her flinch. "I never wanted to carry a gun," she whispered. "No one ever does," he replied. "But this world doesn't wait for wants." In the early morning, they climbed a ridge overlooking the town below. The buildings looked like toys scattered on the earth, their shadows long and broken. Hattie stood beside Sawyer, arms crossed tight against the wind. She stared at the roofs, the church spire, the courthouse steeple. Her voice was quiet but firm. "What if we don't go back?" He glanced at her. "What if we stay here, ride further north, burn the book, let them keep their lies?" Sawyer's jaw tightened. "You could do that, but you'd die a little every day. Different kind of death, slower, but just as real." She was silent. He added, "I've seen what hiding does to people, what silence rots." Hattie's eyes stayed on the distant town. Her breath came shallow. "I am tired, Sawyer." "I know. I do not want to be brave anymore." He nodded. "Then don't be brave, just be honest. Do what needs doing." The wind tugged her hair across her face. She didn't brush it away. "What about you?" she asked. Sawyer's eyes stayed locked on the town. "I never stopped fighting," he said. "But I forgot what I was fighting for." He looked at her. "Until now." They stood there, side by side, as the sun broke through the clouds and touched the rooftops below. "We go back," Hattie said at last. Sawyer gave a short nod. Her hand slipped into his, fingers rough from days of healing, and together they turned toward the path back down the ridge, toward danger, toward justice, toward truth. The red earth began to change as they neared the outskirts of the town. Shrubs gave way to sparse fence lines, long abandoned wagons half buried in dust, and the skeletal silhouettes of burned-out homesteads. Sawyer slowed his horse. His shoulders were tense. "We're being watched," he murmured. Hattie, riding behind him, adjusted her scarf. "How do you know?" "I just do." The first shot cracked through the silence. Sawyer's horse bucked and screamed. He swung around, shielding Hattie as they hit the ground. Dirt flew. Another shot rang out, splintering the trunk of a nearby tree. 3 figures emerged from behind a low ridge, rifles raised. Elijah's men. "There's the whore and the deserter," one yelled, raising his gun again. Sawyer drew and fired first, hitting the man square in the thigh. The attacker crumpled with a scream. The second man advanced fast. Sawyer aimed, but a pain exploded in his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, teeth gritted. "Damn it," he groaned. Hattie knelt beside him, panic rising. "You're hit." "Keep your head down, gun in your saddlebag." She fumbled through leather straps, found the revolver. The third man emerged from behind a boulder, rifle aimed directly at them. Hattie raised the revolver with shaking hands, sighted in, and fired. The bullet tore through his wrist. He dropped the weapon, howling. She gasped, stunned. She had actually hit him. "Time to move," Sawyer growled, blood soaking his shirt. With one arm useless, he still managed to pull her up. They half stumbled, half ran into the trees. Another shot rang out behind them but missed. Branches whipped their faces as they fled, lungs burning. Eventually, the shouts behind them faded. They collapsed near the mouth of a cave tucked into the hillside, hidden by scrub and shadow. Sawyer dropped to his knees, panting. "You're bleeding badly," Hattie whispered, voice tight with fear. "I have seen worse," he muttered, but his face was gray. Inside the cave, she tore a strip from her underskirt and pressed it to the wound. He winced, but didn't pull away. "Stay awake," she said, voice firmer now. "Talk to me." Sawyer managed a weak smile. "You shoot better than you think." "You scared the hell out of me," she snapped, tearing more fabric. "I thought you said we'd make it back." He chuckled dryly. "We still might." "You were shot," she hissed. "You should be unconscious." "I was a scout once," he murmured. "Takes more than a bullet to the shoulder to knock me out." She stared at him, then reached for her bag. From a tin she'd packed, she pulled dried bark and leaves. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Making a poultice," she said. "You said earlier to boil pine bark and yarrow for infection." I listened. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "You're a fast learner." "I've had to be." She boiled water over a tiny flame, mixed the herbs into a paste, and packed it into a cloth. Gently, she pressed it to the wound. He hissed through his teeth. God almighty! Do not pass out, she said. I need you awake. His breathing steadied. She leaned back, watching him carefully. The fire between them crackled. Shadows danced along the cave walls. After a long silence, Hattie whispered, "Back there, when you got hit, you still held on to me." He looked up at her, eyes dark and unreadable. "You did not have to," she said. "I did," he replied simply. "I would not have let go, no matter what." She nodded slowly, heart thudding. "I've never felt safe," she whispered. "Not since Charles died, not with anyone, not until now." His brow furrowed. "That ain't something I'm used to hearing." "Well," she said softly, placing her hand on his, "get used to it." He turned his hand slightly and closed his fingers over hers. Neither of them said anything more. Outside, the wind howled, sweeping away footprints and the blood trails alike. But inside the cave, the fire glowed steady and warm. The town of Clearbrook was dead quiet by the time Hattie returned. She and Sawyer moved like shadows along the edge of night, staying close to the alleys, the shutters, the dark corners where secrets like to hide. The moon hung low, watching them with a pale, silent eye. Hattie's breath came in shallow bursts, not from fear, but from the weight of what she hoped to find. The old law office stood unchanged, 2 stories of aging wood and shuttered windows, nestled behind the chapel. It had been abandoned since Charles's death. No one dared step inside. Sawyer stopped at the edge of the stoop. "I'll keep watch." Hattie nodded, her fingers already finding the spare key beneath the stone. The lock clicked open. Inside, dust ruled. Old legal books slumped on sagging shelves. The air smelled like ink and time, and the silence was so complete, her own heartbeat echoed in her ears. Her eyes went straight to Charles's desk. She remembered how he used to sit there, jacket off, sleeves rolled, brows furrowed in the yellow lamplight. Now it stood empty. She opened drawers methodically, first left, then right. Then the center, nothing but old pens and files. Then she felt it. A false bottom in the last drawer. She pried it gently. It lifted with a soft pop. Inside was a single letter, aged, creased, sealed with the wax mark of a judge's ring. She broke it open, hands trembling. Her voice cracked as she read aloud to herself, "Hattie, if you found this, then I am likely gone. I tried to hold the line, but the line moved. The men I once dined with have turned wolves. They came to me with threats, Elijah among them, the mayor, the railroad men, the sheriff. They own the law, and I was foolish to think I could stand alone, but I trust you. You always asked why I kept secrets. It was never to keep you in the dark, it was to keep you safe. The ledger is real. And if it's in your hands now, then you're braver than I ever was. Tell the truth, no matter what they do. I love you, Charles." Her knees gave out. She sank slowly onto the edge of the desk, letter clutched in both hands. Her shoulders shook, not with tears, but with fury. Sawyer stepped inside, silent. He saw the letter in her grip, her pale face. "What did he say?" he asked gently. Hattie didn't look up. She read it again aloud, voice flat but strong. Each word landed like iron. When she finished, she let the paper fall to the desk. Sawyer picked it up, eyes scanning quickly. His jaw tightened. He knew, she whispered. He knew they'd come for him. He left it to me, and I ran. "You didn't run," Sawyer said, voice low. "You survived." She looked at him. "He didn't die for justice. He died because he believed I could finish what he started. And you will." There was silence again. Then Hattie looked out the window toward the town square, dim under moonlight. "They hang me once," she said softly. "Let them hear my voice next." Sawyer nodded. "Then we give them the truth, loud and clear." She took the letter back, folded it slowly, and this time her hands didn't tremble. By noon, the square in front of the old church was filled. Men in dust-covered coats leaned against fence posts. Women with aprons stood clutching children, and miners fresh off night shifts squinted into the sun. A makeshift platform stood at the center, 4 crates nailed together, creaking slightly under the weight of truth. Sawyer had built it that morning, before the town was awake. He stood beside it now, silent, hands crossed behind his back. On top of the platform lay 3 items: a worn leather-bound book, a folded letter sealed in broken wax, and Sawyer's revolver. The black ledger, Charles Bellamy's final words, and the threat of justice. Hattie Bellamy stepped onto the platform, boots firm, eyes clear. The sun lit her from behind, haloing the lines of exhaustion that no longer dulled her. She held her head high. "I was hanged in the name of silence," she said, voice ringing out. "Today I speak." The crowd shifted. A few murmured. One woman gasped, recognizing the figure who had nearly died days before. "I was accused of theft," Hattie continued, "of running from the law. But what I ran from was a lie. What I carried was the truth." She held up the letter. "This was written by my husband, Judge Charles Bellamy, before he died. He named names. He named fear. And he believed someone would finish what he started." She placed the letter back down, then opened the ledger, thumbing through the stained pages. "This book," she said, "contains transactions, illegal shipments, bribes, and signatures of men who run this town, including its mayor." Gasps again, louder now. From the back of the crowd a voice barked, "Lies!" Mayor Thompson pushed forward, red-faced, trembling with fury. "This woman is delusional," he shouted. "There's no proof any of that's real. Anyone could have forged those pages." Sawyer didn't move. His eyes stayed on the crowd, watching their faces shift. "Even her own husband knew she was unstable," the mayor went on, pointing. "She fled justice. She incited violence." "She was nearly killed," Sawyer said evenly, "for knowing the truth." "And who the hell are you, Cowboy?" Thompson spat. Sawyer stepped forward, unhurried. "I'm the man who watched his sister hang for a crime she didn't commit. I don't let liars speak louder than the truth anymore." At that moment, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Mary, the old housemaid who'd once worked for the Bellamys. Her hands trembled as she climbed onto the platform. I have something to say." Everyone turned. Mary steadied herself, then looked straight at Hattie. "After Charles died," she said, voice fragile but firm, "I saw Elijah Blake come into the judge's office. He took the black book, said it was evidence, but he burned half the pages, and he told me this never existed." The crowd rippled. Some men cursed under their breath. "I didn't speak," Mary continued, "because I was afraid. They said they'd run my son out of work. But I've seen what silence costs." Suddenly, a sharp click split the air. Elijah Blake stepping from behind a wagon, revolver drawn, and pointed at Hattie. "Enough," he barked. "You'll smear my name with ghost stories and old ink?" He cocked the hammer. But Sawyer had already moved. With one motion, he drew his gun and fired, shooting the revolver clean from Elijah's hand. It clattered to the dirt. Sawyer didn't raise his voice. "The last time you pointed a gun at someone innocent," he said, "they nearly died. This time, you won't get the chance." Elijah dropped to his knees, cradling his scorched hand, teeth clenched. Silence fell. Then, from the crowd, "Hang him instead." "No," Hattie said calmly. "We are not them." She stepped forward. "Let the truth be its own rope." The people parted, unsure at first, then began to murmur agreement. Justice wasn't fire and rope that day. Justice was finally listening. And for once, the town of Clearbrook did. Elijah Blake was marched through the center of Clearbrook in shackles, head lowered, lips tight. No crowd jeered, no one spat. They simply watched, quiet and firm, as the man who once upheld false law now faced the honest kind. Behind him, Mayor Thompson signed his resignation with a hand that trembled more from shame than age. Within the week, the black ledger had been sent to Denver. Names were exposed, accounts frozen, and distant men in suits began to sweat over signatures they never thought would surface. And in Clearbrook, they chose Hattie Bellamy to stand among them, not behind a man, not beside a scandal, but in front of justice. The town's first woman on the council, widow of a fallen judge, and survivor of a rope, meant to silence. The night they told her, she stood under the same 2 trees they had once strung her between. The bark still bore scars from the rope, but the wind was quieter now. The sand didn't sting so much. Sawyer came up beside her. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied. "We did." They never spoke of marriage, not because it did not matter, but because it no longer defined what came next. There were no rings, no vows beneath crosses or contracts, just the way Hattie looked at him when the coffee boiled, or how Sawyer reached for her hand without needing to speak. He rebuilt the ranch by hand. The old fencing was replaced with pine, a crooked barn door straightened, the porch swept, repaired, and layered with a rug someone from town had gifted, embroidered with 2 horses side by side. But it was the sign that made it theirs. He carved the letters at night, sitting by lamplight, whittling each stroke slow and careful. Bellamy Grady Ranch. Underneath, in smaller print, where justice is not hung between 2 trees. The day he hung it on the archway, Hattie stood beside him, arms folded, eyes glassy. "You could have just written ranch," she teased. He shrugged. "Truth deserves a full name." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It suits us." Days passed, slow, gentle. Chickens pecked the yard. Lettuce sprouted near the fence. Children from the town came by once a week for letters and reading, sitting on hay bales while Hattie read aloud. They called her Miss Bellamy, though some whispered Miss Judge, like it was a badge. One morning, Sawyer found something on the porch, a wrapped cloth bundle, still warm. Inside, a small loaf of bread, golden brown, crusty, and shaped like a heart. A note tucked beneath it in Hattie's handwriting. "This isn't to say thank you. It's to say, I'm staying." He looked up. She was standing in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, smile soft and waiting. He didn't speak. He just stepped inside, took her hand, and closed the door behind them. Outside, the sign creaked gently in the wind. The desert had its stories of rope and fire, of betrayal and silence. But here, on a patch of dry land under a Colorado sky, one story ended not in blood or exile, but in a name shared, a ranch rebuilt, and a woman who once hung between 2 trees, now walking free, head held high, beside a man who never asked her to explain, only to stay. If that story gripped your heart like the Colorado wind, don't ride off just yet. There's more where that came from, tales of grit, redemption, and love blooming in the dust. So if you believe in justice that bites back, in cowboys who carry scars and keep promises, and in women who refuse to be silenced, hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We've got 100 more stories waiting at the edge of the horizon. Don't miss the next one.